This is Through the Rear View, a podcast from Three Aspens Media. I'm your host, Lindsay Young. On this show, we look back with the leaders, innovators, and storytellers who have helped shape their industries. We unpack the lessons they've learned, the pivots they've made, and the legacies they've built. It's a chance to reflect, reconnect, and get a view of what really matters. In this season, we're focused on the wholesale distribution industry. Enjoy! My guest today is Mike DeCata, a respected leader in the distribution industry with a remarkable track record. Mike served as CEO of Lawson Products for over a decade, where he led a dramatic turnaround that saw the company's stock price recover from under $6 to more than $60, second only to Amazon in performance among publicly traded distributors at the time. But Mike's story doesn't start or end there. His career spans executive roles at United Rentals, Chef's Warehouse, Grainger, and GE, with deep experience in sales and operations. He remains a committed investor in Lawson and a passionate advocate for continuous improvement. In today's episode, we're going to look back on the lessons Mike has learned as a CEO, his time supporting the industry through associations like the National Association of Wholesaler-Distributors, and why building culture and sticking with it is just as important as making tough strategic decisions. We're going to talk about leadership mistakes, preserving institutional knowledge, and how the best executives stay close to the customer. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate it. Looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. So can you give me a little bit more on your background, your first job out of college, how you landed there?
Sure. So I'm a mechanical engineer and love engineering and science and technology. Stay current. All this time still read Scientific American and other trade journals, science related stuff all the time, as well as lots of books and textbooks. Some of which I'm going to refer to a little bit later as it relates to artificial intelligence. But started in 1979 at General Electric. It was called General Electric then, not GE. In power systems, it was a multi-year technical marketing program. I was in the industrial area, mostly power systems, steam turbine, gas turbine, transmission, nuclear, that whole broad area. So it was a great initial education. Um, and from there, and we'll come back to some of the lessons learned, but from there, spent 18 years at General Electric. And I will say, while I was with General Electric for 18 years, GE was a big enough and diverse enough company that while technically I was with one company for 18 years, in reality it was like five companies because I went to GE Plastics and then semiconductor doing state of the art. I mean, literally cutting edge, state of the art semiconductor technology. I spent time at GE Capital. I was in robotics, again, power systems. So all manner of different things kind of technically under one General Electric umbrella. Now, the umbrella was held together by a common culture and a common way of doing things. After 18 years at General Electric, I was recruited away by an ex GE colleague to join Grainger. A tremendous experience. And it was really the Grainger that sort of sunk the hook in me about distribution. I didn't think a lot about distribution. And there's so many people in the world that don't really think about distribution at all. And if you
Not
ask
at all.
what it is, they would have a hard time describing it. I was shocked to learn that the NAW, of which I'm a member of the Institute board and used to be chairman of the NAW board, represents more than $7 trillion of the US economy. That's $7 trillion. That's real money. I mean, almost everything around us goes through some form of distribution. Food, furniture, everything goes through distribution. 5 years at Grainger, and I really came to love distribution. From there, I spent some time at United Rentals. Lesson learned: sometimes the job you accept is not the one that actually gets presented to you on the job. I actually joined United Rentals with the intention of building a distribution business for them in construction-related consumables. Saw blades and bits and fall protection, shovels, sort of in association with the primary business, which was construction equipment rental. But before my first day in the job, the CEO who hired me had informed me that he had lost his vice president of fleet operations, the person who controls all the assets of the company, and in an asset management company, like a rental company is. He said, I can't leave this job empty. So, congratulations. I know this is not the job you accepted, but you're taking this job. And
Surprise.
oh, by the way, I need a very significant cost reduction from you in the next 3 months. Okay, I didn't even know what this equipment did. I didn't understand the words, the names, or anything about it. But what was I going to say? I did. Um, my team and I bought $750 million a year in capital equipment from the biggest players out there: John Deere, JLG, JCB, global players. And as a result of a strong team, and I will say a pretty high dose of humility on my part, I was
Yeah.
able to let my team lead me and train me. I was the lead negotiator, but they had all the knowledge. So another lesson learned, one I learned at General Electric, but humility goes a long way when it comes to leadership.
Excellent.
Let's see, from there, I'll fast forward a little bit. Food distribution industry, Chef's Warehouse. We were in the specialty food world. By the way, lessons learned there. Whatever you're distributing, whether it's saw blades, drill bits, motors, light bulbs, or truffles and olive oil, they all operate the same way. The products may be completely different, but the processes of distribution apply broadly to whatever the product, and in many cases, product plus service is. I did some time in private equity, looking at distribution related companies with a number of private equity firms, and then ended up at Lawson, which is where I spent the last 10 years of my career. It was a tremendous experience, but the diversity has served me well, and it served me well intellectually. I've enjoyed it very much.
Uh, how did you mentioned several lessons and kind of your overview of kind of each stop of your career? How do you feel like those experiences shaped how you led later in life? Perhaps at Lawson.
Well, I guess I can say that throughout my career, from the very first job at GE in 1979, there were people that imparted great wisdom to me, but there was also a foundation that I brought, and that foundation was everything I do, I want it to be a stepping stone intellectually in the knowledge and the foundational understanding that I had to apply to the next thing I was doing. And so I was very conscious, even right out of school, thinking about what am I learning, not only about this specific industry or this specific product or this company, but broadly about how business is done and fundamental sort of business concepts, also
Mm.
leadership concepts, human values, integrity, sort of foundational stuff. Everything was meant consciously, and I thought hard about this, be a stepping stone of knowledge to the next thing. Having said it, there were some tremendous pieces of wisdom imparted, one of which stuck with me to the very end, still sticks with me today, every day. Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, when I was there most of the time, I was there before Jack was actually CEO and chairman for a short
Okay.
while. But one of the things that Jack said was face reality for what it is, not what you wish it to be. That's an important lesson. That's an important lesson whether you're analyzing your business or looking at your strategic plan, maybe looking at your own strengths and weaknesses or that of your team or your customers, competitors. Face reality for what it is, not what you wish it to be. That's been a guiding foundational principle of every single thing I've done since then, both in my personal life and my professional life. So there have been a great many lessons. One leader, who I will come back to in a moment, became a tremendous manager for me. In fact, I'm going to tell you his name right now. Dave
Okay.
Calhoun, who was an incredible manager for me at GE Plastics, went on to be very, very senior executive at GE. Also went on to be the CEO and chairman of a CEO of Boeing. One of the things Dave once said to me over dinner was I was grousing at him about he being an idealist. And I was grousing that, it's easy to be an idealist when Jack Welch, chairman, has your back. And he said, Mike, somebody has to be an idealist. That stuck
Okay.
with me. That stuck with me to this day. You need to lead from the front. And yes, there are difficulties, and yes, there are obstacles. And people will often disappoint you, but you have to be an idealist. That was a lesson I learned from Dave Calhoun a very long time ago. And he continues to be one of my role models of a tremendous leader and a great balanced person, family man, leader, executive in every sense of the word. So I had the privilege of being associated with incredible people, of which there are dozens.
I have a couple follow-ups to that, Mike. First, when you're talking about being an idealist, and then right before that, you're talking about making sure you're seeing what's actually in front of you. How do you balance those two perspectives as a leader?
I always start with assuming the best in everybody,
Okay.
customers, suppliers, investors, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly employees. So that is the going in default position. It's what helped enable me when I joined Lawson, which was in free fall and really, really struggling. Many people said it wouldn't survive. Um, I made no changes to the leadership team. There over the years, people moved on and they took bigger jobs in other companies. But my initial intention, and say that throughout my whole time, was to make the team that we had enable them to be successful rather than bringing in my own team.
Mm-hmm.
Look, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and if we could figure out how to unlock the most potential from every person that was already there, that would help a lot. Now, there are situations where people are not good people, or maybe they're good people and they just really are not capable. Those are the hardest
Wrong
people.
spot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're in the wrong spot, and those are the hardest people to push out because they're giving you their heart and soul. They're committed. They're loyal. They're good people. Um, they're just not capable of the job, or maybe the job has moved on beyond them. Those are very, very, very hard decisions to make. um, Face reality for what it is. Sometimes people are not good people, and sometimes they're not capable people. But those are the relatively rare exceptions. That's one foundational value. I'm idealistic. I'm a process person. So one of the, let me say, mentors, though he was a consultant, was the person who really brought quality to General Electric, a small firm, Eckes and Associates, George Eckes. And George was an incredible, probably the best teacher I've ever had, including in college and any other capacity.
Huge.
And he talked about quality and consistency. And many lessons I learned from George, again, way back at GE Plastics in, I think, 1993 or something, we brought forward to Lawson, and George helped enable Lawson to become far more process oriented, and process Lean Six Sigma became part of our DNA.
It's amazing. So
So there
before
were
we go,
many, many lessons, and again, I've been the beneficiary of great, great people around me.
incredible. Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. You've had some giants around you who it sounds like you really built your leadership kind of philosophy around. I have one other question before we go deeper into Lawson. Um, you had mentioned we've talked before, and you had mentioned like you just talked about when you were talking about listing off all the different companies you worked for and the different jobs that you did. We've talked about before how, and you just mentioned with United Rentals that you often were being asked to do things maybe you've never uh, done before.
Mhm.
Um, and it sounds like you were really open to those experiences throughout your career and you trusted yourself to dive in and go for it. What kind of advice would you give to people who are earlier in their career right now about just saying yes?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's critical. First, I always consider the intellectual diversity, going from GE Power Systems to robotics to plastics, GE Capital. Um, I always consider that a form of compensation for me. I might have done better had I stayed at a really profitable business, GE Plastics, for example.
Hmm.
But for me, intellectual compensation, the diversity, learning new ideas and technologies and meeting new people and processes, that was a form of compensation. Now, again, it doesn't pay the bills, but it is satisfying. So the other thing I would say is have the courage. None of us were born with any knowledge. We were an empty vessel, every single human being. Everything we are today, we learned. We learn to be parents, maybe. We learn to be business executives, leaders, sales reps, operation. We didn't know any of this before. So if you get thrown into something that is completely out of your wheelhouse, completely unknown, throw yourself into it with a great passion. Probably it's going to work out. And I've said it to myself, now I say it to my children and eventually to my grandchildren. All right, they're 18 months old and 5 months, a little early to start
You're
teaching them
planting the seed.
civics and management leadership. But I've always said to them, uh, if you dive into something in a matter of a very short amount of time, because you're being one dimensional, you're thinking about one thing for all day and all night, really,
Mhm.
you're going to become a subject matter expert very, very quickly. I have a daughter who is in construction management. She is a senior project manager at a very large construction company. She was very worried when she got out of graduate school that she didn't know anything about this. I said, look, you're going to be an expert in no time. I have another daughter in another part of the world at Sotheby's, the art auction firm in New York City.
Mm.
Highly specialized, esoteric, selling $100 million paintings to very famous people. She's same thing. This is scary. I'm not sure I can do this. They love her there. She's doing a great job for her clients, for the business. Have the courage, have extreme self-confidence, work hard. 95% probability you're going to be really successful. And recognized as an expert, not just successful, but recognized as a subject matter expert in a very short amount of time.
I agree with that. I love that piece of advice. So kind of jumping into the final, you're retired now. That's why I say the final
That's right.
stage of your career at Lawson Products. So just to give the listener some context. So I think I mentioned before, you helped grow the share price at Lawson Products by more than, I think it was like 1,000%. It was a
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
crazy high percentage from 2012 to when you retired in 2022, 2022.
Yes, that's right.
But the context is Lawson, you had mentioned before, Lawson was kind of in free fall. It was not in great shape when you joined the company. So, can you talk a little bit about where it was to set the stage for those who aren't familiar, and kind of what your directive was coming in the door? And then the third part
Yeah.
of that is maybe why you thought you could come in, you said yes, and turn the business around.
Let me just say at the outset, it took a fair degree of courage or craziness, don't know, self-confidence, all the above. But except Grainger, Lawson um, was like a 75-year-old company. We were the 37th company to join the NASDAQ, and the year the NASDAQ was created. So it's an old company. And so as an old company, I didn't, you don't know too much. I mean, you can interview, you can do all the research you can do, talk to people who've been there or know them, know people there. But you're still a lot of leap of faith involved. But I made some assumptions. Could have been wrong, but I wasn't. I assumed that a 75-year-old company had been doing something right, or they would have been long gone. Um,
Absolutely.
I believe that they had a unique and differentiated value proposition. I'm a big fan of the Michael Porter books. I mean, there are a lot of business books that are written, but they're mostly rehash of older ideas. Michael Porter's book, Competitive Advantage, and his other book, Competitive Strategy, just two cornerstone books that look anybody in business should read and become intimately familiar with. I believe that Lawson had a differentiated value proposition, and I assumed that it just wasn't being executed well. Now, any of that could have been wrong, but it turns out it wasn't wrong. So that was really the reason that I wanted to jump in. I knew the business a little bit, not too different from Grainger, in many ways very different, but at the highest, at 50 from 50,000 feet up in the air, it looks similar. Um,
Sure.
and I thought that maybe it was just not being executed well. As it turns out, that was the case.
Okay. So, how did you earn the trust of the team from the start? Because that seems critical to,
Sure.
getting off on the right
Well,
foot.
I think trust is earned over an extended period. You're under a microscope as a leader at any level, certainly CEO, but at any other level, first line manager, you're under a microscope every day. Every action, every nuance, every meeting you're in, you're being observed. But one of the things that I did that I think helped was, it's also in today's day of the internet, you can be researched like crazy. So even before anybody meets you, they can know a lot about you just by doing the most basic Google search and forget about large language models and ChatGPT. Um, so the team at Lawson, the employees at Lawson, not just the senior team, but every knew a little bit about me. They knew I was associated with private equity. They knew I was a General Electric person. They knew I was in Grainger. So they knew a lot about me before they ever met me. There was a lot of fear because of the state of the company, financial state, free fall, a lot of unrest among all employees, that I was probably there to package the company up and sell it.
Yeah.
That was not at all my intention. Now, it might have happened that way or might not have happened. It was never my intention. So one of the things that I did, technically 3 or 4 days before I started, it was September, the end of September 2012. Um, our HR executive walked me around all the floors of the building and just did a little stand-up meeting with me with groups of 15 to 20, 25 people standing up in the hall near their work and office spaces. And I said a couple things to them. First, we had just finished installing SAP. It was not fully operational yet. We had passed go live and all that phase of it, but we were still not getting the full benefit out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I broke the ice with a little bit and said, I am so happy that you've installed SAP, and I'm so happy I wasn't here for it.
Yeah,
But
right.
got a chuckle out of that. SAP has got huge benefits if you survive it. And it did. We have huge benefits at Lawson because of that ERP and what it can do for us. And we did survive. The other thing, though, that was a question for everybody is that I lived in Connecticut. My wife was in Connecticut. We owned a home there. Children were not children at that point. They were in college on the East Coast. And so the first thing I said to everybody, having spoken to my wife in advance, was that we would sell our home in Connecticut and we would buy a home in Chicago. We wouldn't rent a home or lease a home. We would buy a home in Chicago, and I was committed to the success of the company for as long as it took. And I will demonstrate that in my own actions with myself and my family. I think that, day one, technically before I was even an employee, helped neutralize some things. Now, it just got me, 3 steps toward first base. It didn't get me very far, but it was a good start. Uh, the next thing that I did sort of set the stage for the rest. I asked my administrative assistant, who I'm very close to still, and my wife and she and her husband, we get together all the time. We're still connected very closely. Um, I said to her, on my first day in the job, I'm going to go make sales calls. And jokingly, she said, Mike, you actually have to come to the office for your first day. Well, I can make it happen for your second day. So on Tuesday, 3 days after I had already been there, Tuesday, after my first day, Monday, she set up sales calls, and I made sales calls from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon with an incredible sales guy.
Mhm.
It was a tremendous experience for me, but it also set the stage with all the other sales reps that sales, customers, growth were paramount to our success, critical to me, and that I was going to focus on everything we could do on being successful in serving customers and enabling our sales reps to serve customers and earn a good living. So those were a couple of actions. A few months later, for after that, I asked every one of the executives. I did it, and every single executive, I said, please go make 1 day a month anywhere in North America, but it can't always be Chicago because we don't want to deluge the poor Chicago reps with all the executives making sales calls only in Chicago. I said, it can't be Chicago. Go anywhere you want, spend 1 full day in the car with a sales rep, which we all started doing and did for years. About 3 months later, we had an all sales meeting in St. Louis. And one of the things I said to all the sales team was, please give me time. I said, there will be no day that you come in and everything that's broken will be fixed. That won't happen. But every single day, some little thing will get fixed. And at the end of a year, at the end of 18 months, we'll provide a list of all the little things that you see that got fixed. 2 years later, when we had that same group of 800 or 900 sales reps together, we had 3 pages of rolling things, small line items that were fixes. They were all small, none of them were huge, but collectively, they made the sales rep's job and our customers much, much happier. And the sales reps were much happier because of all the resistance and friction we took out of their job. So those were a couple of actions. Of course, I had to win trust with the shareholders, public company, um, and with the board of directors. A lot of communication, a lot of proactive communication. Little by little, though, I got tremendous support from our board. I got tremendous support from our shareholders, gave me tremendous latitude to prove that what I was trying to do would, in fact, work. And then later on, some very large investors that started buying our shares in the public market became huge supporters, and they are still the primary shareholders of the now combined company with Lawson, called Distribution Solutions Group, and
Yep.
Luther King Capital Management, the Headwater Fund. Brian King became huge investors and huge supporters, which continues to enable the company to prosper long after I'm gone, which I believe also should be a measure of every leader, not the CEO only, but every entry level leader up to the CEO. Is does the company continue to prosper after you leave? Have you set the
Mhm.
company for success after you leave? Because that is the risk of a charismatic leader, is if it all becomes about the leader and not the infrastructure and the process and the culture of the team, then the company is at risk when you leave the management job or the CEO job or anyone in between. So success has to be measured after you leave as well.
Yeah, what's that legacy that you're leaving, right? Yeah.
That's right. What legacy are you leaving and what infrastructure and culture that lives long beyond you if you've done a good job?
Did you have to, up front, did you have to make any hard decisions to
Yeah,
kind of shift the
sure.
ship or boat back on course, whatever the metaphor is that you want to use for
Yeah,
that?
my goals were very simple. It was keep the thing from sinking. It was a pretty basic goal. We had 0% EBITDA. Stock price had cratered. Every one of the executives on my leadership team was either considering leaving the company or actively had their resumes on the street. We'd lost several hundred sales reps over the previous few years.
Oh, that's
I mean, there were probably 4 or 5 enterprise level risks. I use that terminology because public accounting firms always want to know what your enterprise level risks are. That's a
right.
risk that can put you out of business. It's unusual to have 4 or 5 of them going on at the same time, but we did. One of the tough decisions was I was handed on my first day in the job, the desk I walked into, a 75-page strategic plan. I'm a simple guy. If you need 75 pages to explain your strategic plan, we got a problem.
That's a big problem.
But among the pieces of the strategic plan, basically it said we want to be a next day emergency response company.
Okay.
Grainger's in that business. They're great at what they do. I used to spend 8 years or 5 years at Grainger. They were great at what they did. Why would we want to be a little Me Too company that couldn't possibly compete?
Compete against Grainger.
So
Yep.
there were elements of the strategic plan that I just rejected the minute I read it. In fact, it took 75 pages to get to that kind of a thing. I must have want to read 74 of the pages. So there were those kinds of things. I really made no human resource related changes. There were no initial short term decisions as it relates to human resource, but it was a focus on the basics. It was a focus on let's get the ship righted. Let's get pointed toward 10% EBITDA. My feeling was for our business, our industry, the nature of how we do things, not true of all other industries, but I felt like 10% EBITDA and good, consistent organic growth, not 10%, but probably less than that, good, consistent organic growth were the minimum level to be respectable. They weren't great. I mean, Fastenal was 22% EBITDA, so that
Yeah,
wasn't, Fastenal's great.
minimum.
10% EBITDA was not great, but it was respectable anyway, and good organic growth. So focus on the basics, throw out the strategic plan, um, and a couple other things. Our inventory turns were really terrible, way less than two. One of the things that Dick Kaiser said, he was the CEO and chairman of Grainger for a very, very long time, a brilliant, brilliant leader. Um, One of the things he used to say to us is, you can't sell from an empty wagon. That really applies to distribution. You had to broadly stock what customers needed. Certainly, there were many items they need all the time, but sometimes they needed the less frequently turning items. So there were board members who said your inventory turns are terrible. You got to get them better. Well, 60% of Lawson's product is private label. Now,
Right.
many times people think of private label as the economy class of product, the cheap stuff. Ours was just the opposite. Ours was highly engineered for the unique needs of the maintenance mechanic. When I say that, even things like nuts and bolts. Look, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I had never thought there was much differentiation in a nut and a bolt. But if you're the mechanic working on a United Rentals John Deere backhoe in the field, a, a foot deep in mud, and it's 10 below zero, something as simple as getting the wrench on the head of the bolt is a big deal. So we engineered our products for the dirty environment, for the tough environment, not the assembly line pristine environment, but the mud and the dirt and the grime. So many of our products were engineered that way. So when I went to our senior vice president of marketing and product management, and I said, "Hey, look, the private label products are killing us. The inventory turns. There is a minimum order quantity if you're going to design your own product. You can't design one of them. You've got
Right.
to buy in orders of 10,000."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, yeah, we could get rid of the private label products, and our inventory turns would be great if we used branded products, but the margins would be less than half."
Oh,
So
interesting.
I had to let the senior vice president of product management and marketing explain to me that yes, inventory turns are important. Margin is probably more important. So first week in the job, I said, forget it, never mind, my mistake, let's keep the private label. So there
Yeah.
were many occasions where I was given advice, including in one case from a board member, that I had to go against and say, yeah, that makes good sense under some circumstances, but here's the cost of that good advice, and weigh balancing stakeholders or forces to find the best decision. So there are many tough decisions, but very often when people ask that question, they're asking about pushing people out the door, and that wasn't one of them.
Mm. Yeah. Well, but that also speaks back, the way you approach that speaks back to the humility piece that you mentioned earlier, where, okay, they said, this makes sense to do, we need to do this. And you said, but I don't have all the information. So you went to the people that did, and you listened to them, and you respected what they said. And then you came back and, responded in a way that was very balanced rather than just saying, nope, the numbers say this, we're just doing this. I don't care what you say. It sounds like you really took the time to listen and learn because while every distribution business is very similar, it's also very different.
That's right, and that was a piece of advice about figuring it out first, basically, before you start making and jumping in and making decisions. And very often, new managers at every single level want to make their mark. They've been put into a first level management job, or they've been put into the CEO job, or all the ones in between. And there's pressure to make an impact
Hmm.
for all the reasons that you were hired. You want to make an impact. Dick Kaiser, the CEO of Grainger, when I first met him a week into the job, I had spent 18 years at that point at General Electric. Dick was an understated, soft spoken, incredible leader. We spent 45 minutes in his office. I did most of the talking. He was a quiet guy. And at the end of it, I said, Dick, I've been with General Electric for 18 years. GE people have a reputation, some baggage. Um, what advice can you give me? And he had a smile on his face. He said, "You know, we brought you here to make change, but we're not broken. Do nothing for a year." Now, you could not conceive of a GE manager telling you that. Do nothing for a year.
Yeah.
Figure it out before you make change. I was so shocked that I went to the senior HR executive, was an ex-GE guy at Grainger, and I said, "Is this a metaphor? Am I not understanding? I
I
don't
guess.
understand what he just said to me. Like, this can't be right." He said, maybe he was exaggerating. Do nothing for 6 months. Still inconceivable to me, but they were both right. Figure it out before you start making change that may do damage. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of self confidence to do what appears to be nothing for a while you're figuring it out before making change that everybody can see. That's a very hard thing for a new manager at any level to do.
Uh, you also have to have the backing of the stakeholders, especially at a public company, right? To be able
True.
to have that patience. Is that
Yeah, no,
that right?
that's exactly right. And one of the things that we mentioned earlier that I wanted to go out and make sales calls. Look, I was making sales calls for my own education.
Hmm.
Again, I'm smart enough to know that there's a lot of things I don't know. And
Yeah.
while at the highest level, most distribution businesses are the same, ours was somewhat unique in that the products we were distributing was the same as cheese and olive oil and salt blades from United Rentals, but we were wrapping our value proposition in what's called service intensive vendor managed inventory. So our sales reps were acting as service reps, counting inventory, problem solving, going in as if they were employees. And I didn't have the full understanding of the nuance of how that happened and how it was executed, why customers actually did business with us. I mean, from a distance, I was guessing why they did, but you don't know what you really know. Um, so we were making sales calls. I was making sales calls for my own benefit, not for the sales rep's benefit. I asked all the executives to do the same thing for their own benefit, but then collectively we could make better collective decisions to solve the real problems, not the ones we thought were problems from corporate. But the secondary huge benefit of all that for me and our CFO, a brilliant, brilliant leader by the name of Ron Knudsen, who is still the CFO of Distribution Solutions Group, it enabled Ron and I to go when we were speaking to the investment community, investors one at a time or in large presentations. We could speak from firsthand knowledge. We could relay stories of specific customers, specific problems, specific situations that wasn't secondhand knowledge. We were present. We were there making the sales calls. And when you can communicate something with firsthand knowledge, the depth, the nuance, the credibility is far greater than secondhand relaying of a theory.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it had a secondary benefit to us of being far more effective with our board of directors and far more effective with our shareholders, both for myself and for Ron. And it served us very well every single meeting with both shareholders and the board of directors.
That's incredible. Um, in addition to kind of focusing on the culture and getting to know the business, I wanted to talk a little bit about your focus on process, if we could.
Yes. Yeah.
You're pretty well known as a champion of process. You love to talk about process, and that started with your work at GE. So where did that whole passion come from, and how did you bring those principles into Lawson to kind of support kind of its upward trajectory?
Um, I think that the place that it most resonated was my time at GE. Not just the Lean Six Sigma part. Yes, that was sort of the culmination of that
Okay.
language process, Lean Six Sigma. But even way before that, I had been with GE probably 10 years before I got exposed to Lean Six Sigma, maybe or so, 10 or
Okay.
so years. But GE is a highly process oriented, structured company. So being exposed to the human resource process every year, a highly structured process of assessing all the people in the company, helping them to develop, holding them accountable, writing your own internal resume every single year and having your manager and your manager's manager review that. Those are examples of process. Budgeting, leadership process, communication process, all things that I saw and experienced and had to participate in before I got exposed to Lean Six Sigma.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I did get exposed to Lean Six Sigma, and that was part of the necessity of optimizing GE Plastics in all aspects of that company. But for me, it was also the opportunity to demonstrate courage, since at that point I had decided I was going to. Jack Welch was trying to get people to move cross functionally. So I had spent the previous 8 or 9 years in commercial roles, marketing, sales, market development, new product development, things like that. And then he asked a whole bunch of the high potential people to switch gears and move into completely unrelated fields. One of them for me was on the supply chain side, and I was assigned with GE Plastics Supplier Quality, Global Supplier Quality Initiative. We were bringing, again, Eckes and Associates, George Eckes, in to teach Lean Six Sigma. I had gone to the Motorola School in Schaumburg, Illinois, and really got excited. Mechanical engineer and statistics all kind of goes together.
That's just how your brain
Uh,
works. Yeah.
yeah, your brain thinks like an engineer or a process guy. Well, anyway, George taught us so much about Lean Six Sigma, but part of the way he did that, and his team did that, was taught a number of leaders, and then we had to go teach. And so I think it was a 13-week course that I had to facilitate and teach to the other GE Plastic people. It really sunk in with me. Carried that forward every other thing that I'd done. Fast forward, I joined Lawson, I think it was like October 1st of 2012.
Mhm.
In early January of 2013, now I had left GE years and years earlier, but sometimes there are people in your life that you just have a chemistry with. They resonate. They're great teachers. They're brilliant. There's wisdom, and again, privileged to know many, many of those people that I stayed in touch with over many years. I try never to lose connection to people as best I can. Well, George was someone I really respected. He's written 10 or 12 books on the subject of Lean Six Sigma and quality. And so I brought George and his firm to Lawson. Now, one thing I'll say, I'm from the Northeast. I grew up in the Northeast. I live in the Northeast now. I came to appreciate every single day that I was at Lawson the Midwestern culture.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being biased.
Well, I grew up
Midwestern
in
culture.
Nebraska, so I'm okay
Okay,
with
right.
that.
Midwesterners are nice, really nice, genuinely nice people. They're considerate of each other. I know I'm generalizing. They're respectful of each other. And I saw that on my first day at Lawson. And on my last day at Lawson, I reminded everybody that I never took that for granted for a single day in 10 years because I saw it.
Amazing.
Well, the Lawson people were incredibly open minded about bringing process and Lean Six Sigma to Lawson to help improve the company. They were all committed to the success of the company. They knew it was broken, and they were sort of reaching for anything that would work to improve the future of the company and their own future. So we
Mhm.
brought Lean Six Sigma to the company, and it paid huge, huge difference. Millions and millions of dollars of EBITDA, millions of dollars of top line growth. And but very often people think of Lean Six Sigma or quality as cost reduction. Surely it is that. It's about removing waste and inefficiency from the system. But one of
Mhm.
the commitments I made to all of the employees of the company is that we will improve the process, but no one will lose their job because we have improved the process. I could make that commitment because we were committed to growth. What I
Yeah.
wanted to do was to grow like crazy, but not add any more resources to enable the growth.
That's
So
the
by
idea.
removing all the non-value added waste that everybody in every function was going through, from sales reps to AR and AP and purchasing, finance, everybody was spending half of their day reworking something that didn't get to their desk correctly. So by focusing on process improvement and taking waste out of the system and time out of the system, we freed up huge resources. And throughout pretty much my whole time, even putting aside COVID, we were able to grow top line and add no G&A cost to the company.
Going back to the field sales program where you got the executives out in the field and that kind of went on for, several years. I remember when we talked previously before this call that you mentioned that some of those visits became less frequent over time and that program kind of phased out a little bit, but that was a good lesson to you about kind of leading from the front and that people are watching. I thought that might be good to share with our listeners. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I joined the company, as I mentioned earlier, I started visiting with customers at least one day a month all over the place, for the purpose of educating myself, and then I asked all the executives to do it. So when I say all the executives, I mean everybody: HR, legal, finance, IT, every one of the executives, the senior vice president of operations, our general counsel, our lawyer, every HR, everybody had to spend one day a month riding along with a rep. And by the way, we weren't going to the big important customers, the strategic customers, the biggest customers. For me, that was separate. That didn't count because those were special events.
Okay.
These were just everyday sales calls with everyday sales reps doing their everyday job. But so one of the things we did, you get a bunch of people together, and there's always bragging and trash talk and just entertainment. We as a management team got together one day a week for a couple hours, talk about all manner of topics, strategy and updates on data and finances and everything. Well, one of the things that came out of that was whichever executive or executives that had made sales calls that week would report out as to what they learned, what they saw, what they did. And so we turned it into a little bit of humor. Everybody was bragging about how much they sold on their sales day. Of course, the truth of the matter is none of the executives, including myself, ever sold anything. We were just riding
I
along
was
with them and watching.
Yeah.
As it turns out, our chief financial officer, who I mentioned earlier, had the all-time record for us at one time was like $25,000. And we're talking about 94-cent nuts and bolts. So $25,000 in one day of, $1 items. Okay. He also had the worst day, zero, a couple of weeks later. So, but we did turn it into a little bit of entertainment. But the
That's fun.
lesson learned was not a good lesson for me. It was one that I knew intellectually would happen. As years went by, 4, 5, 6 years went by, and we became all more comfortable with the business, got busier with other things, other distractions, other stuff. I stopped going every single month. I'd go every other month, and it was every 3 months, and it was just slipping. And immediately when I started slipping, everybody else started slipping. And they were slipping because I was slipping. So I wasn't leading by example on that topic. And right away, immediately, everybody else followed suit and they weren't leading either. But it was my fault. It wasn't anybody else's fault. It was my fault. Well, the lesson learned there is that applies to everything. It applies to patience. It applies to candor. It applies to integrity. It applies to any subject. If you aren't leading by example, if you aren't leading from the front in your own personal conduct, very quickly, very shockingly quickly, people will start following that example, and it's a bad example. So, when we talked about this originally, I have a very high standard for if you're going to be a manager or a leader or a senior executive, every single action is under the microscope every day, even ones that are nobody's business. Still, you have to be a role model for everybody in your company, even if it's none of their business, even your personal life, your conduct, all of that is under examination every day, and people watch. And if they see bad behavior, they'll think it's okay. And if they see laziness or sloppiness, as in my example, not making sales calls,
Mhm.
that becomes okay too. So
Yeah.
every once in a while, even late in your career, you get to learn ugly lessons all over again that you should have known at 25 years old. And we did. We all knew these things, but we get lazy. And you got to guard against that. I had to guard against it, and I regret ever letting it slip a single time.
At the same time, leaders are humans too, right? Make mistakes. It's going to happen.
Yeah,
It's how you respond to that
true.
probably
That usually isn't an acceptable excuse, but it is true.
is true. I think it's an acceptable excuse. Well, I think how you respond to mistakes or, problems like that or mistakes that you make is really what makes you,
Absolutely.
a good leader. Yeah, exactly. Um, your personality seems to have aligned well with, Lawson's needs, when you first
Mhm.
joined.
Mhm.
And your approach to things, we've talked about your humility, your willingness to listen, the time you spent to get to know the company before you made changes, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that and then maybe build off of that to share with others, maybe who might be considering a leadership role and how they could potentially, I know that's a big question and it's hard and
Yeah.
depends on the situation, but how they could assess that alignment for themselves before taking a big leadership role?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this, and luck plays a big part of it. I think
Sure.
luck plays a big part of everything in life. But when I was considering joining Lawson, I mean, you do all the research you can do, as I mentioned earlier at the top, that, I thought it was a great and differentiated value proposition. I thought it wasn't being executed well, so on and so forth. Um, I believe that I had the previous experience and the academic orientation and, to do what needed to be done. But what I couldn't know, and by the way, the board of directors, of course, I interviewed with every board member.
Yeah.
They couldn't really know because they weren't living in the business every day. They were, a board. They were a board, so they would meet once a quarter. And how intimate can a board be in the subtlety of the culture?
Right.
The sales
Yeah.
reps, the operations, purchasing people. Um, so by pure luck, what the way I conducted myself was exactly what the company needed. So I'm a mechanical engineer. I mean, a lot of people can't get excited about nuts and bolts and hydraulic fittings. It's not the sexiest thing on earth. But I could. I was very excited about it and the process.
Yeah.
And, spending a day, getting dirty with a sales rep in a shop, putting parts away, checking inventory in bins. So by, and the fact that the second day on the job, I went out and made sales calls. There were
Yeah.
things that could be planned for that helped, and there were things that we were all just lucky about. So when you're interviewing for a job or when you're interviewing a candidate to hire,
Fair.
we
Yeah.
can spend the most time we can spend on competency and process and personality and all the rest, all necessary things.
Hmm.
But the hardest things are the fit, the personality. How does a person perform under stress or when things aren't going well or when they're receiving disappointment or criticism? All of those are the things that make the difference. And they're by far the hardest, most nebulous things, but they often make the difference of success. So you can have all the credentials, competency, and knowledge you need to succeed. There's probably 50 or 100 people that could have succeeded as well as I did on those dimensions. Where we all got lucky, and I personally got lucky, was that my personality, communication style, things that excite me, just humility would, oh, look, I learned humility a long time ago at General Electric. When you're surrounded by
Oh,
almost everybody who's really good at what they did, you learn humility very quickly. Um, but carrying that forward and expressing it, explaining to people, sales rep, for example, I'm not here to be a better sales rep. I'm here because I want you to teach me what you do. Not that I can help you. I can't help you. You can help me.
yeah.
Things like that all helped. And candidly, we just got lucky. I mean, I got lucky. It might not have worked out that way, but it did work out that way. And employees and shareholders and customers, suppliers were all the beneficiaries of a lot of good luck. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us. I mean, after really hard work and putting a lot of time and effort, thinking hard, working hard, both academically, and I'm not talking about school, but after school, reading, studying. After all the hard work and the hours you put in, luck plays a huge part in everybody's life.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just have to take that step and have faith that
Can't do anything about it. Might as well just accept that life luck matters.
luck matters. So I know one of the things that you did at Lawson that I think is, it's close to my heart because my passion is content and sharing knowledge, which is one of my motivating factors for this podcast, actually. But it's a big challenge for distributors to kind of capture and share knowledge across dispersed teams, and that was the case at Lawson. I'm sure that was the case at other companies that you worked at. Can you talk a little bit about what you did at Lawson in terms of trying to bring that knowledge together from your dispersed teams, and then provide a little bit of thought on, I guess, advice for other leaders who might want to capture and share that knowledge but don't know where to start? And of course, my follow-up to that is, where do you think, similar initiatives are headed given the rise of
I think
AI?
the answer to
So
that
there's
second
about
part
five
is
questions that
very
I just provided.
scary. Um,
Yeah.
so, I could just a little side diversion here. Early on at General Electric, I was in a business called Utility and Industrial Sales Division. It was about a $5 billion sales division.
Okay.
And we sold a diversity of motors and switchgear and stuff, from multiple manufacturing units within GE. One of the challenges, this was very early, it might have been 1985 or something like that, 84. One of the challenges that we had in that division is that we had an aging population of sales reps. I mean, this is heavy industry, and as these sales reps were aging, they would retire, and everything that was in their brain left with them. There was no real way of capturing, and some of this stuff was pretty esoteric knowledge. I mean, oil well pumping in northern Canada is very different than oil well pumping in Texas because it's warm versus it's really, really cold. And
Yeah, that's true.
we're pumping in a pipeline.
Yeah.
So our sales reps and application engineers learned this stuff over 10 and 20 and 30 years of experience. And when they left, you're back to ground zero. So I had tried to use what was then state-of-the-art technology at GE in 1985. Candidly, we failed utterly. I mean, it just couldn't be done in any pragmatic way. All right, fast forward to Lawson. We had about 1,000 sales reps, about 250,000 unique items across a wide diversity of products, from chemicals to fasteners to automotive, hydraulic fittings, electrical connectors, all manner of things. And as a sales rep, you're alone in a car. There were 1,000 of them all over North America, all over the US, all over Canada, and you're kind of alone. And you've got 250,000 items. We had 90,000 customers. And so even if you understood how the item worked or the specification of the item, the application of that item in a real world scenario was a little different in some sort. Chemicals act differently under some circumstances than just the specs say. So one of the things that, from that failure at GE earlier, that stuck with me, and some failures don't leave, they stay with you. Anyway, I wanted to figure out a way of getting knowledge sharing among the reps. The first goal was just so that someone could ask a question and get an answer. How does this spec work? I've got this problem. My customer's got this problem. How do I solve it? We couldn't hire enough people. We could never afford enough people in product management at corporate to be on the phones answering 1,000 reps worth of questions about 250,000 unique items.
Yeah.
So they did the best they could alone, feeling frustrated in a car with a customer asking a question they didn't instantly know the answer to. So we created through Microsoft Teams. Now, again, today we all think of Microsoft Teams as, a webcasting like this vehicle we're using now. But originally, Microsoft Teams was just a knowledge sharing platform. So my first goal was to get all of the sales reps participating in any way. We set up communities. We set up a chemicals group. We set up an automotive group. We set up a fastener group. We set up a women's affinity group. These were all groups that you could join and ask each other questions, just knowledge sharing. My goal, and what I communicated all the time, was that we wanted a sales rep to feel like They had 1,000 teammates in the car with them at all times. My
Amazing.
ultimate long-term goal was that a sales rep could ask a question or a customer could ask us a question of a sales rep and as close to instantly get an answer. So the first goal was getting people just to participate. The second goal was cycle time compression from when a question got asked to when an answer was delivered. And it was 100% distributed. I mean, corporate people could answer the question or field people could. Anybody who had an answer could weigh in and give the answer.
Hmm.
So for the first couple of years, my goal was just getting people to participate. One of the ways I did that was a person, a woman in communications by the name of Elise Rannick, wonderful person. She would come to my office, having been the curator of this tool, and she would come to my office, having read 10, 20, 30 questions over the previous week, find one that was really good and representative. And she would type an answer. She would write an answer for me. She would come to my office, and I would sit next to her, and she would dictate to me what I was going to answer back and how I was going to answer the question. It was coming from me, but
Yeah.
she was the one that picked the question and delivered the answer. And just, I was just being the typist, typing it in, so that as the CEO, I was leading by example. I was reading the stuff, by the way, but she was picking the questions and answers that were
Great.
best representative. So we did that for a long time, and it was incredibly effective. It resulted in millions and millions of dollars in sales that would
Awesome.
not have happened had we not gotten quick questions and answers. It also had the secondary benefit of helping sales reps feel not alone. If you've ever been a sales rep, as an individual sales rep, you're alone in a car all day long. You're not dealing with, other than your customers, you're not dealing with people. You're alone driving. And that's a hard life. Everybody thinks the glamorous life of a sales rep isn't so glamorous.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a secondary benefit. Now, let me fast forward. What we started doing was we were getting lots of questions and lots of answers, and we were archiving all of this. The idea being that if a question was asked that had been asked a month earlier, the sales rep could just search it and there would be the answer in the archive. When the archive is small, that's incredibly effective. You're building a real library of questions and answers. But
Yeah.
the bigger the archive gets, it's almost as bad as having no archive at all because there's too
Right.
much data to find. So too much data is as bad as having no data. So today, what we're working on, and by the way, you asked about NAW earlier in the distribution industry. So NAW is in the process. We've got years, dozens and dozens of years worth of data, documents, written information, research studies across the spectrum of distribution.
So
So
cool.
we have now employed a company called Profit Optics, and they have a large language model, artificial intelligence, called Nucleus. What Nucleus will do is read all of our questions and answers. It's company confidential, so we're not sharing this with our competitors, all of our internal questions and answers. And what Nucleus will be able to do, just as we're doing for NAW members at NAW, is it summarizes everything that NAW has written and makes it available in summary form, just like ChatGPT does for
Incredible.
people who play with
Yeah.
that. So our goal is to put Nucleus on the site as if it's another sales rep. So when a sales rep asks a question, somebody, but it might be the machine, will answer the question. It might be the AI large language model answering the question. So again, it is the next step forward in real-time knowledge sharing on any subject. I was
Incredible.
very, very excited. It took us years to get to first base with MS Teams. It produced tremendous results. This is now a next step that can apply to anybody who's got a distributed sales force. Whether you're in the pharmaceuticals industry, computers, chemicals, or selling nuts and bolts, you can use this kind of technology to extend the knowledge of your sales reps into near real time, instant knowledge. It's incredibly powerful.
So powerful. And I love that you used the tools that you had in front of you to do it. You didn't try to build something crazy and fancy or invest in this big
Right.
system. You used a pretty basic setup that sales reps ostensibly already knew how to use and kept it simple. which probably increased the utilization of that tool. And now you have all this great data that you can now
Well, that's
leverage
right.
using new
And
technology.
with 1,000 sales reps, every question you could ask, there was somebody to answer it. It's just finding someone who could answer it. And so the sales reps became committed to each other. They knew that they had a responsibility to their teammates, and they knew that if they had a question, somebody, probably someone they never met, would answer their question. Well, they also felt that responsibility to participate with answers to people
Yeah,
who they never met either. So it became a very, very powerful tool for culture. It became an effective sales tool. We just sold more because of it, which was the primary goal. And
incredible.
now with the next step of Nucleus and Profit Optics, again, we're using this at NAW so that as an NAW member, you can begin to search anything that NAW has in its records of research to answer your questions. In the same way, we want our sales reps to be able to answer questions for their customers.
That's so cool.
Very
I have
powerful.
one final question about Lawson. Mike, what's one thing you hope, or what do you hope people will remember most about your time at Lawson? I know that's putting the focus back on you.
Well, it's not putting the focus on me so much as my hope would be that we would be recognized, the entire leadership, for doing good, for enabling our employees to have fulfilling careers.
Hmm.
Lawson, now, with DSG, a much larger number, but Lawson, as Lawson, had 90,000 active customers. So, one of the challenges leaders have at every level is, why am I spending my time doing this? I mean, is it to enrich shareholders? Is it just to make money so I can pay my bills? Is there more to it than those, kind of fundamental? Is it only about money? And so when you're selling nuts and bolts, not the sexiest thing on earth, finding a way of connecting what we do to something bigger than those, paying my mortgage or
Yeah.
sending my kids to college is challenging and it's important. So one of the things we used to talk about inside the company, and when I say inside, I mean among all the employees, was yes, we do this work so that we can pay our bills and send our kids to college and do what we want to do. But we also do it so 90,000 customers can send their kids to college and pay their bills. It was a much bigger thing than us or our shareholders. It was hundreds of billions of dollars worth of our customers who needed to pay their bills and keep their businesses running for the greater good. And so that was the motivation. So, what would I like our team to be recognized for? I would like our team to be recognized for enabling people to do good, for enabling customers to do better, fulfilling our employees' aspirations, both intellectual, financial, our suppliers, our customers, certainly our shareholders. All right, 1,000% stock price appreciation is a good start, but it's only a start. Far, far more to come, and even better results in the near future and in the longer term future than the good foundation we laid. So that's kind of one of the goals. If I could be remembered, our team could be remembered for that, I'd be satisfied.
That's amazing. I'm shifting away from Lawson. We have a few more questions left. Thank
Yeah,
you
sure.
for this wonderful long conversation. You mentioned NAW earlier, and I wanted to recognize the ways you've always served the industry because you've been involved in NAW for a very long time. And so I just wanted to get kind of what drew you to those roles, the role you have played at NAW, and what role do you think associations like NAW should play, I guess, in today's landscape? What draws you to serve kind of in that bigger, broader way?
Yeah. Well, I've been attracted to NAW for a long time. Throughout my career, I've been associated with various trade associations and organizations in the robot industry and semiconductor and power systems and, various other places. Construction equipment was really interesting. But never in my life have I been exposed to the intellectual value, the content, the quality, the depth of content that I get exposed to every single year at the NAW Executive Summit, at the Innovation Conference, the Shift Conference, the other conferences that are done, or the smaller group events that are held in various cities around the country. Tremendous exchange of knowledge, peer knowledge sharing, and people who are genuinely willing to reach out and help each other. If you call an NAW member and they can help you, they're going to help you. They're going to make it a high priority.
Let's just go into the ending questions that we pose to all of our guests. If you could go back, give advice to yourself when you were first starting out in this industry, now that we've gone through your entire career, what would it be?
Um, there are whole bunches of things. Starting with be a good person. I mean, integrity, quality, consistency, compassion. Um, be considerate of everybody, even people you disagree with, who have a different perspective. For more often than not, what we do in business is a continuation of judgments. It's trade-offs. It's a gray area. It's not arithmetic. It's not 1 + 1 sometimes does not equal 2. There's many different ways of accomplishing things. And with people you disagree with, they may be right and you may be right. You might both be right. And it's just a matter of which variables you're putting more emphasis on than the other person. So coming at problem solving or intellectual disagreement that way helps diffuse a lot. So that's one thing. As I said earlier, along with hard work, accept the fact that luck has a lot to do with it. Luck, in everything. You know, I think about success for anybody at any level. And, I have children. Again, they're not children so much when they're 35 and 33 and they're business professionals and
They'll
so
always be your children. So,
all accomplished. They're not babies. Anyway, but I said to myself and to anybody else who will listen, you have to be completely balanced and you have to have success everywhere to have success as a person. That includes your work, the intellectual aspects of your work, financial rewards associated work. But it has to do with your family, a balanced family, work-family balance. It has to be spiritual. It has to be intellectual. Health. People neglect their health. They work crazy hours. They eat badly. They drink too much. They behave badly. Look, if any one of those things, and there might be 2 or 3 more that I'm missing, if any one of those is amiss, the whole thing is amiss. The whole machine doesn't work. So focusing exclusively on your career and your success and your leadership is probably going to lead to an unsatisfying outcome. It may be incredibly satisfying on one dimension, but terrible on some other dimension. Everything has to be in balance. Family, health, spiritual, intellectual, and work to be a fully functioning, successful person. It's very hard to do at any given time because you're being pulled in opposite directions. But those are some sort of lessons that I've learned and continue to try and strive for as best I can. Don't always succeed, but there is effort.
yeah, you're making progress towards them. What's one thing about the old school way of doing business that you think still holds value today?
I'm not sure if it is old school, but integrity and values and human connection,
Sure.
I think all that matters. Um, I am, in the short term, things like ChatGPT and artificial intelligence will help enhance our capability. AI and generative AI and general intelligence is going to help discover new drugs and cures for illnesses. A great many things positive will come as enhancements to what people do. In distribution, I think about how AI is helping our sales reps with a large language model and answer questions and so on and so forth in the short term. In the longer term, 5 to 10 years, we need to think about the role of sales reps. We need to think about the role of analysis. When a customer can interact as a dialogue with a machine, general artificial intelligence, and it can answer the same questions that a human being can, you're going to have to question what's the role of a human sales rep or a radiologist or a doctor as a diagnostician.
Hmm.
All of these will come into question far quicker than people are thinking, 5 to 10 years. By the way, for anybody in the audience, I try and read a lot on a great many topics. A relatively new book that just came out, there's a person who's been in artificial intelligence since the early 80s, maybe the late 70s. His name is Ray Kurzweil. He was at MIT as a professor. He must be in his 80s now. Anyway, his new book called The Singularity is Nearer is an incredible book, history of AI and computing, but talks about the very near term, 3, 5, 7 years, and talks about the longer term, 10, 15 years. He can't think beyond 10 or 15 years because it's too far into the future. And 10 or 15 years isn't very far into the future.
No, it's
Um,
not.
in 10 to 15 years, we're going to have to think about what it means to be working, what it means to be creative. My daughter in the construction industry just showed me through ChatGPT a rendering of a room, a photograph of a bare room, and she asked ChatGPT to fill in with doors and cabinets and colors and styles, and it gave her a dozen different iterations based on her dialogue with ChatGPT, and I know the room she was talking about. It just blew me away.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
have to have an architect or a knowledge of computing to do any of that. She is not an architect and she's not a computer programmer. And wow, what she came out with took her 15 minutes to get a dozen renderings that were incredible. So again, thinking hard about a doctor, an accountant, a computer programmer, a sales rep, these are things that leaders are going to have to think about in the future. It's a little
Absolutely.
scary.
It is a little scary. Final question. Based on your knowledge and experience, what do you think should excite the next generation of leaders?
Everybody wants meaning. The older you get, the more you appreciate the reality of wanting meaning
Yeah.
and wanting your life to mean something. At every single level, as an individual contributor, as a first level manager, CEO or chairman of a board or president, you get the opportunity to enrich other people's lives, to do good and help society, help an individual, help a family, help your customers, your suppliers, your investors. Um, that is seriously motivational. There's more to life than paying bills and enriching investors. Those are important things. They're necessary things. But the bigger thing is contributing and helping others do good and be fulfilled. I think that's incredibly motivational if you're right out of college and it's your first week on the job, or if you're a retired CEO thinking back about what went well and what didn't go so well. They are exactly the same motivation, I believe. And they are the most important, I believe, motivations.
Amazing. Well, that's it. I've made my way through my questions today. Thank you, Mike, for joining me, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing the lessons you've learned, for being open and honest with us. I'm hoping that our listeners, took something away from this conversation that they can apply to their life. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it very much. If I can ever be of any assistance to you or to any of your listeners, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I talked about the motivation being enabling, helping people do better. If I can do that, it's very fulfilling.